Hello everyone, today we talk about a new as old topic, it couldn't be otherwise, that is the cosmic centrality of Rome in the history of mankind and beyond. As you know, this channel is a bit different from the others in many ways, for the better and for the worse, but what really matters is the message, is the meaning contained in it, and the ultimate connection with the truth that is so too often out of the reach of our poor cognitive means, but that we make our best to at least align towards, which is already a very difficult thing on its own. This is part of yet what I call series, but at this point, say the way I upload this content, everything is blurred, is blended. You don't have really to search for too much. If anything, we already talked about the centrality of Rome in practically every content that we ever browse. I mean, the understanding of the metaphysical fundamentals of the Holy Catholic Apostolic Roman tradition, if you do not know the meaning of either of these names, even just from an etymological point of view, of course, like, your life is going to be extremely difficult, even if, of course, you do not know the difference. In any case, our care for the topic will be, of course, increasing in this path that I want to lay in parallel with the Jubilee, right, and dedicating, in fact, the following months to the meaning of Romanity, which I think that I always use this term, the people, right, but in general, it is very difficult to understand. It is very hard to understand. There is no doubt about this. This is also what keeps me, let's say, separated, quite detached from the other channels, because basically this has nothing to do with anything that has ever been uploaded in here, and I know it by fact, because I don't even need to search for anyone having uploaded anything remotely similar. But it is an equally difficult task, even for those who are habituated to the most specific meanings of these terms. I would like to start, without too further ado, from one topic that requires at least a tangential explanation in introducing Romanity, Roman tradition in particular. That is to say, the label pagan or paganist that represent in many ways connected with what most people think like ancient religion was a deep misunderstanding, right? I'm not going to, of course, descend into all the... I could make an entire video on this topic, but I don't want too many premises. When we look at these terms, pagan, paganism, etc., we are referring merely to a limited and discordant aspect of spiritual practice. Of course, like at this point, I don't even say the average person thinks that pagan means this, because I presume that at least my channel is large enough at this point for people just to simply find the content which I already explained this, right? So I will not say the usual thing about the average underschooled person without adequate parental upbringing does not know what pagan means, because of course they never known that in the first place. But it's important to stress, of course, how, you know, the infamous meaning that for an ancient person, the term pagan, unless we're talking about lesser people from the fourth estate, that is definitely not what this channel is made for, really would rejoice in their paranoid superstition that had nothing to do with Imperial Catholic tradition, that of course is divine in kind and was shared by all the great civilizations in the world and beyond, right? And just, if you are a leader, if you believe in sacred royalty, if you have, of course, all the initiatic military pathway to transfiguration in holy combat, right? You can't be a pagan by definition. I explained this also recently in the Germanic Imperial Catholic tradition in relation, for example, to the Sippe and the Comitatus. And there is also really no dualism in that, right? What we're observing more kaleidoscopically, but still hierarchically, the ultimate decline, the lower level, the ultimate fragmentation of the pagus. So, of course, the lowest form of social organization, which stands in opposition to the imperial Catholic traditional unity. Right. So this is beyond, of course, the notion that, again, you've been told it was Christianity and that the people who were before Christendom were the pagans. You do not know the term Catholic either. I don't know, it's kind of the Pope, and it's a branch of Christianity. Like, okay, all that cross out. Like, even if you accidentally stumbled on my content, I will give you like the redeeming grace and favor of not insulting you, because ignorance is always about evil at the end of the day, but we are superior to that, right? And of course, many people live into paganistic superstitions, right? This is not even about being a mentally disturbed person like neo-pagans or whatever these people think that history is supposed to be in their feministic fantasies, even when they think they are sort of the macho bros of the situation. It's a specific ideology sewn around the radical moral, personal, and cultural inferiority of lesser people, which of course always get what they deserve, and it is, at least to some extent, funny to see sinking, especially in this time in history. But our task should be, in fact, also to salvage this human sewage, and that's in fact what the Imperial Catholic tradition always stood for, especially among the peoples that these people think that were pagan, but that's in fact the childish animal part of these people can be somehow refined. Now, in contrast, of course, a new tradition emerged. When you look at the history of Rome, of course, you see the heart of Christendom. And so something that is even more sort of difficult, in my experience, like with especially the internet to explain, because I like to sense very much like the emotions, the centers of people. The many people cannot accept that Christianity is part of the Imperial Catholic tradition, mostly because they make it sort of an ethnicistic issue, and not, in fact, a transcendental one, like the one that the Empire is called in all ages to summon, right, and to transfigure in a redeeming fashion, right? So we will, at some point, especially talking about the cross, which is going to be a part of the series, like an entire episode dedicated to that, explain how Romanity embraces Catholicism also after the paradigm shift and the contraction of the world that brought eventually to Christianity to affirm itself, but still in fact containing a Catholic spirit, at least for that truly and more eminently Catholic current rather than the Christian one, paradoxically, that in fact witnesses today, I mean, people who call themselves Christians, but they have nothing to do with the Imperial Catholic Church. I mean, zero. Like, this is not just about being, I don't know, a Protestant, where this which is already like an enormous problem in a strictly theological sense, but it's other than also just an historical one. But it is really a matter of responsibility. Like, if you live in the constant fear that basically there is an external force that is going to devour you, you are living in a paganistic superstition. And so you are the one who is living the initiative to forces that you're declaring to be superior to you and that you're basically not able to master anymore. That means, ipso facto, that you're metaphysically outside of at least the inactability of the Imperial Catholic tradition. And it's not that you can't come back, but it's going to be increasingly difficult if you've done so. So we'll try to fix this in part, but definitely, this was a millenary effort, and with my videos I can't just do so much. The centrality of Rome in this shift, characterized also by a fervor that, while well-intentioned, often disregarded indeed the purity of the original norm, right? In the video about the Germanic Imperial Catholic tradition, or at least like the Germanic path to it, I stressed not just the Romanity of the enterprise, which also people have sort of difficulty in accepting, including the Germans at the time, even after, in fact, the end, and especially even after the end of the western half of the empire, which was not, in fact, an empire, was just a chunk of the empire, part of the empire that had just shrunk, that now had to be refilled, did bring, finally, however, miraculously, and that's why I titled that video in that way, to a reinvigoration through that Germanic primitive awakening through warlike lifestyle and a general awareness of the more direct consequences of failure. The same, in fact, Western Christianity, two standards that you can argue were already higher than the ones of any other part of Christendom, already in the moment in which Peter and Paul set foot in Rome, because of the same Romanity, because in that case of the Latin, of the Italic spirit, it was already and still and obviously and continuously as radically different from the Hellenic one that essentially informed what we call Orthodox, even though the official name of what we call the Orthodox Church is Catholic Church. Guess why? That, in fact, during the Middle Ages, as we've seen also, and especially in other videos, instead, in fact, was overwhelmed by Roman Catholicism, which is also and truly the only kind of Catholicism that exists. I mean, here we're talking metaphysics. We're not talking about legalistic territories or disputes about who can call himself a Roman. The more massively powerful manifestation of the Roman Catholic tradition is exclusively connected with the holy city of Rome, right? This is not something you can copy, you can shift. I made a video about the traditional meaning of space. Constantinople derived its power from that, even when they did not control Rome anymore, and the popes and the emperors reigned over Rome. And this is something that, as you know, I particularly explore in my videos that are fundamentally based on Latin Germanic Europe, exactly also for this reason, with a particular at least care for the centrality of Rome, still and especially in those points, which is essentially also yet one of the most, I think, and say not inexplicably but embarrassingly outrageous provocations that I can make, in the sense that if people still believe that the Middle Ages were a time in which in the West, I don't know, we were just all fragmented states that didn't have anything to do with each other and that had sort of destroyed Rome, and that nobody was believing it in sort of that Catholic unity anymore, well, I don't know to which point of under-education we have arrived. I understand that the masses, by definition, are not aware of the stuff, that, in fact, the main problem is for the elite to cow these into ways that can at least channel a certain amount of redeeming dynamics into the entire system. And it's always a matter of mutual responsibility. But again, if you're still at that point in your cultural background, well, you may want to wake up to. This is not just, I don't know, to the Ghibelline tradition, because many people tend to do this today, but without any adequate background regarding the theological specifics of why we talk about the Holy Roman Empire in the terms that we do, right? And what had happened in the Christian East, for example, and why Rome was, by also explicit admission of, saying, Western Europeans, as far as Iceland, right, the very center of the world, right? There is also among conservatives nowadays this sense that, I've seen Peterson for the first time has included this, but I don't think he does it because normally Anglo-Americans do not properly understand this concept because they have built a great part of their pseudo-cultural foundation on the denial of the essential Romanity of the universe. But they have at least included Rome for the first time between Jerusalem and Athens, as if all of a sudden they woke up to this notion that, in fact, what is Rome? Like, the only problem with that is that if you do not study in the European tradition, you will never understand what Rome is and why, right? And so why it's a tiny bit of a more important thing than the same Athens and even of the same Jerusalem, which is, again, something I want to really come back on overabundantly in many of these videos. But back to the point, always be aware of the spiritual forces that agitate these systems. No other but God is the origin of any power. So if this manifests in any way, this is not about factionalism, this is about the actual merit, right? And the direct, the immediate derivation of the Imperium from God. Now, the horrifying fact from a strictly educational point, or I don't even know how to define it otherwise, that a traditional framework could be called polytheistic is incredibly terrifying. I mean, I can't even begin to realize how, say, the West really bought into the notion that there ever was historically something called or understood or conceptualized as polytheism, right? If you're talking about paganism in the exclusive acception that we used before, that is to say, yes, every pagus, unaware of a superior order, which obviously they really weren't, that it could have not been for strictly metaphysical reasons, but we don't have time to explain today, would have had its own idol used in a superstitiously, passive attitude, as if, give us something because we're poor derelicts or something, is the only way you can think that any form of polytheism existed, except these people did not understand at all that specific and local force in that ways. They knew that there were many greater forces and it was actually a greater one, but that they were too inferior to be up to, right? This is the fourth estate and lesser people. So basically you devote yourself to this fractal, lesser, telluric, chthonic element that you are also just subversively and invertedly tied to, in the sense that you know that you will be devoured by when you die, and you count just of this lower force to be at some point, I don't know, interacting maybe from your side antagonistically with the great God Father of heaven, which is of course a blindingly shining force to any kind of person that sort of still exists as a sort of, I don't know, caterpillar into the dirt, but that you're simply not able to control. So there will be an overlord over these people working the land throughout all the various years, while these higher beings were, of course, dominating the earth and dominating the world. And of course, they knew pretty well that all these gods were nothing but the fragmentation of the one, right? And so basically some emanatistic flame that had basically dissolved itself because of original sin out of the entire unity, and these lesser elements were dissolving into, right? It's not even thinking of things like, I don't know, a pantheon. And so the idea, of course, that the word different gods, even as properly as a linguistic expression, accepted, but because it was conventionally accepted that all these gods were just a manifestation of a greater one as such. And so that even sort of in an essential way, they could not escape, of course, the Catholic unity and the great mission of mankind, of course, to invert the fall and recompact the celestial vault. Rome is, as you know, the place where this decay that had been going on across all the world, like by in fact the birth of Christ, there is no country out there that believes that fundamentally a human can save himself. This is extremely clear in all the literature that we have. This had been long forgotten. It was sort of a much older thing. The Romans were among sort of or actually the very peak of those who had maintained it as a veritable revival between the Bronze and the Iron Age. So they had represented a golden age that had allowed also for the Christian creed to substantiate itself for obvious reasons. And it had been prophesied. You can be found also in Virgil and so many different aspects of what, of course, the Fabius Apollo was really to be born again for, that we're approaching Christmas as well. Rome was the unavoidable as sacred center of the ultimate attempt to invert the trend, not in a particularly different way from which Buddha had done from the Vedic religion, and as you know, from a military standpoint. That is to say, the absolutization of devotion, and not sort of the generative process that had taken place in humanity by that point. It is to say, just consider relative as opposed to absolute power as the actual discipline here. The great universal empire had sort of failed its mandate, at least the officials that had meant to detain the Imperium had not proven capable of maintaining the imperial Catholic unity. And Christianity was the one that assumed control in a degenerative condition, in fact, that allowed it as a precondition for the same Christendom to be founded, with the, as you know, traumatic split between the temporal and the spiritual order that we can admire in its functional peak of the Middle Ages. Were still aimed, of course, at coming back through these two elements to the unitary one, with the papacy and the empire, that, of course, never denied one another, were integral part of the Catholic unity. So be extremely careful when you study the investiture controversy or the clash between the Guelphs and Ghibellines, because I've seen online some terrifying things that are coming out. And I say it not just as a PhD in medieval history, but also as someone who is extremely careful with the actual notion of power, not to notice, of course, the hypocrisy and the ultimate, human, at this point, I would say even subhuman, degeneration that we are encountering, to the point that even history is a matter of fundamentally emotionalistically subjective opinion rather than actual revision and comparison with all the available experience at our disposal. Now, this is also another important topic. Of course, we will talk about that for especially the Ghibelline Middle Ages, because it's also the key to understanding the wealth position that is indeed more controversial, but that is not out of place in that specific order. You must understand, in fact, again, what this really was, and you will realize essentially that everybody was Ghibelline really at the time. And you have sort of been lied to into this sort of weird, video game factionalism with different colors and symbols, but you do not really understand what's behind that. There's only one source of power, not two, right? But you can have multiple heads that control that power after this has been fragmented in the world. The power is only of that higher nature. The rest is just like a sort of series of projections of a fallen world that is basically going to be lost itself in the shadow. But the fact that we understand our tradition as radically monotheistic is not in contrast to pre-Christian doctrine, especially the one of the empire, because there was no other vision but the Catholic one. Even among the pagans that were, again, just a lesser dimension of the actual Catholic tradition. What is crucial to understand here is that both the peak of Catholic power, in a truly transcendental sense, the rise of Rome and the conquest of the world, which is something that was never done in that speed by any of the greater empires before, not even by Alexander, if we look at it in relation to the persistency of the legacy, right, of this empire, and the actual capacity to transfigure the subjected populations, right, and this the reaffirmation of this radical monotheistic tradition. Again, monotheistic is a bad term as polytheistic, but just for the sake of understanding each other here. Both emerged from the same context of Rome. In other words, the single most important events in the history of mankind occurred centered in Rome. This is not about Jerusalem, because without Rome, today we would not talk about Christianity. And this is extremely clear to anybody who knows the history of St. Peter and St. Paul especially, which was actually also an antagonistic one, notoriously so, but that could not but seize Rome. And there are some incredibly heavy and dark aspects of this. It's not to say that this transformation was painless, or that people don't have to be disturbed by certain specific concepts that were expressed from within the, especially through, I would say, rather, the Judaic language, because otherwise the Jewish community was, actually one of the oldest in Rome to begin with, and also pretty loyal one when you look, in fact, at that specific cultural context. That's why the centrality of Rome is crucial, because Rome had really that transfiguring capacity, right? We will talk more about the Inquisition, ghettos, and more, because we have to expand also into the world of the Reformation and especially the Counter-Reformation, to understand how close these actually Catholic beliefs are to us in the interest of time, just a few hundred years, right? So not really going back even to Christ or to the Romans in general, right? But the same Christian vision could not immediately do without Rome, not just because Christianity had been born under Rome, but because, of course, there is a providential meaning to that. And you know that providence, etymologically, explains us that it refers as a term to not just the capacity to see the future, literally, providere, but to, in fact, mold it in his own, in your own image. That's what Alexander did, for example, by seizing the East. Right? It's just a great megalo-psychic capacity that, of course, had the Imperium manifested in the world. That also, by the way, was very much instrumental to the same rise of Rome in a metaphysical sense. So when we look at the shifts that Rome has been theater of, we are compelled to seek a higher perspective for a broader understanding of such phenomenon. Because this is definitely not a normal thing. This is not something that happened, I don't know, in China or in India or anywhere else, right? Not even Islam actually can compare remotely to this, in spite of the proximity as religion of the book, etc. Islam arrives late, right? These people fundamentally believe they can still do with the spiritual and temporal unity, and of course they fail, because they actually ride the final collapse of what had been antiquity, especially in the Levantine area that had spiritually very few to do, in fact, with the broader Indo-European pneuma that had managed, in fact, to seize like the entire Western Eurasia and beyond, and that in fact crumbles as soon as this absolute unity had to be affirmed. Like the moment in which they stop expanding, doing it so also from pre-existing regional pools and maintaining a chronic instability unknown in the Christian world, exactly thanks to the much better tuning of humanity at that point into this temporal and spiritual contrast, whereas Islam did not have priesthood to balance the system out. And we can still see the consequences of this to this day, right? Remember that being formally traditional has nothing to do, but I mean literally nothing to do with being traditional, right? Yeah, I don't know how to stress that. There is a difference between being primitive and being culturally underdeveloped, right? They're two very different things. I mean, if you are a lesser people in the world, it's not because you're better, because you're like how people were in the past. No, it means that you're sunk, right? If you don't have actual power, if you screw up any kind of proof of military testing whatsoever, if you just are kept together with saliva, like the world sees that, right? This is also a very important thing that psychotic and paranoid people must see, that everybody knows that from the outer side. It's not like you have to explain to the world what you are. Other people know what the world are. They are actually educated. They believe in places where we actually own the Imperium, and we see it all through. And that's why, of course, always lesser people root for inferior cultures. I mean, people who screw up in a given society, of course, are the lesser elements that are incapable of accomplishing the greater heights of the system. And of course, they must sabotage it to bring it down, therefore sympathizing with lesser people from the other side that, if that broader civilization did not exist, would also simply massacre them, because they are at least, at times led by themselves, other than being just an inferior estate within a florid culture. Now, this Roman shift, again, in many respects, is incredibly challenging to assess. And I am not aware, like in the history of philosophy and sort of also theology and more, that Romanity has ever really found a specific pattern of interpretation, because it does itself contain the entire Catholic dimension, so the entire world, and it is essentially but a spring for our understanding, rather than something that we can hope to dominate, because God only can. Now, this higher perspective is, of course, a unique traditional axis that clarifies the intricacies of the traditional cycle, because the world does have a linear history, other BS they've been told is that, people in the past did not believe in linear history. They didn't really have an eschatology of sort. It's the terrible Christians who injected that. This is also yet another lesser people's superstition. All Catholic tradition has everywhere in all their mythologies, of course, the notion that there is going to be an end time, which there is going to be a major clash, and the entire fort of mortals is to, earn their transfigurational place in heaven through self-sacrifice in holy combat in order to augment the forces till end time, where like a final subversion must be averted. Cyclical understandings of history. It's not like there aren't cycles, like people say, history doesn't repeat itself, but at least it rhymes. Yes, that's true. There are different cycles of different cultures that go up and down, right? What we call, of course, there are many, but in this case, the Roman one is also sort of transcending metaphysically the original ethnicity that we are discussing, right? The Hellenic cycle does not have this shot, for example, not even really the Germanic one in a broader sense, if not in a truly Romano-Germanic sense, because otherwise it wouldn't make sense in a Catholic sense, which also tells you how, of course, our condition after the end of the Roman Empire is precarious, because there are so many other peoples with their own previous cycles that are somehow lost. Think about, the Iranian one, but there are many others. In any case, the difficulty in this, of course, encompasses also the decline of the entire traditional cycle. That is to say, all of the individual shortcomings are often factionalistically blamed, right, on the respective failures, without realizing that these encompass us all together as humans, that there are cycles that truly owe to this or to that people more evidently its accomplishments, like in the case of the Romans at the utmost level. But the danger of the entire universe falling for good is always there, and this is why we are looking at tradition to salvage not just ourselves, but what this means, like in the connection between God and mankind, right? Now, what is fascinating about humanity is, of course, the emergence of successive forms. I mean, we're talking about the Roman Empire, we're talking about the Roman Church. We find, of course, overlapping the Holy Roman Empire. We find other powers, the disgregation of the Christian unity with the Reformation, the decline of same Christendom, at least as a belief, which is actually encompassing all other beliefs in the world of any traditional origin. This is definitely important to ponder on in moments of genuine crisis that, however, are cumulative, meaning that the crises that we're discussing in historical perspective have been just summing each other up till to our point, right? So it's a burden of sin that is piling up on our shoulders in such a dramatic way. Such crises occur when the deep-rooted sense of tradition is lost. There are fluctuations in this, otherwise we would just look at a free fall, but in perspective, in the history of mankind, it really is, because we do not perceive, of course, like the magnitude of the distance that separates us from God. So we say, well, I don't know, there were several thousand years that this was going on, or so, or even if there had been many more. Like, after all, it's so gradual. If you look at what really happened from a historical point of view, these things are not sort of gradual at all. Like, every age has its own signs of the decomposition of the generation. It's not simply about, the old man that says, it's not like once upon a time. Now the youth is... There are things that also improve over time. There is power that is displayed, but it's mostly, in fact, a matter of entropy, right? It's like mixing the cards. It's not like you can't say put them together as to being previously scattered, but this is still not how they were properly piled up in order before, by seed, by figures, by number, and so you can get this illusion that things are going temporarily better, but there is something more essential that is ruined at that point, that you're not making the effort to put back together, either because you do not know how to do that, but especially because you do not have really the force or inclination to do so, and that keeps spiraling down, and it is really like terrifying, which obviously prevents also to return to previous paths, right? As identical moments in the evolution of human and cosmic experiences cannot be recaptured. You can't quite rewire, go back in time. Essentially, what is done, except we know that, divinely speaking, redemption and transfiguration are possible, yet they come at a cost that it's not much the fact that we cannot quantitatively think how to enact, but that consequently would damage us more than we know how to precisely use it, right, as a specific surgical tool, right? This is what we were talking about yesterday, for example, in the video about the Aztecs, and how they had kept alive, let's say, their connection with God by committing to ritual human sacrificing because of this infernal frenzy for blood. And so of course the traditional, at least in principle, bloodshed of the more valuable, at least by he wants to supersede him in a way that can basically bring to accumulation of power through the same. There are so many symbolism, including the same Christian one. In a recent video about archaic Rome, we've seen the word beautiful deer statuettes from the Latium Vetus that, of course, are the symbol of the Indo-European nobleman, right? The sacrifice youth, like, that is basically not just a passive sacrifice, properly like this polyalpium of the finest being killed, which is, of course, taken on by the same Christianity. The other day we were talking about Saint Maurice and how the Frau Münster of Zurich was founded by Charlemagne, that sees like a deer, right? Of course, it's a symbol of Christ. Also in the broader tradition, historically, I have also here in the video some beautiful mosaics from San Clemente in Rome, for example, that shows that, because the horns, of course, or not properly, I don't know how you call them in English, represent the same crucifix. And of course, the best spoliopima, the ultimate sacrifice of the self. So indeed, not just the sacrifice of the other, but the sacrifice of all you hold dear in order to truly surpass any sense of fear that is the only one materializing the world as we know it, and preventing us to transcend our own mortality. It's purely our own fault, right? It's not original sin in the sense that this is being impressed on us. It lives through us, just like the sins of all our ancestors. We're just keeping and actively replicating that, reenacting that, because otherwise, in the sense, we're prisoners of ourselves. Like, otherwise, we would really go back to the one immediately, right? So there is no dualistic heresy. There's no, like, the good God and the bad God. That's also a superstition for lesser people that basically are saying that literally they have no agency whatsoever in this. It's just a matter of, you will be taken at some point, and you just have to suffer this constant, in this in this mortal existence, and then everything will be taken care of. No, it doesn't work like that. You are going to dissolve into eternal pain. That is the worst, like probably the annihilation of your existence. If you do not act and fast, and there is nobody else saving you other than yourself, meaning that God, as an immanent force, will always reward you for your actions, so that, again, that Imperium would immediately manifest as soon as you enter in that harmony and consonance with God. But you have to do it, right? God simply doesn't do it by yourself. The same reason why Christ has transfigured the world, which is true eternally. But it doesn't mean that it has left really to humanity just to wait and do nothing in the meanwhile. It's mostly just an incredible display of love in the affirmation that you can, as Christ did, save yourself through the ultimate self-sacrifice. And Christianity literally took over the world, also because it spread from Rome specifically, and from there, way more than Jerusalem, took over the world entire, revitalized by so many different elements, as we were saying before, like the Germanic wave in the Latin world, the symbiosis, the traditional understanding of that fundamental value, right? From, you see here, a human, a manly, if you prefer, in this case, agency, right? And not some, weird messianistic attitude, like other peoples interpreted it. But definitely we did not do that in the West, thanks to Rome. Now, what remains constant is the divine pivot, in fact, in the most precise sense. We just know that what passes cannot return. So this is not really a matter of destroying the vestiges of the past, right? It is about preserving them, venerating them, cherishing them, and to draw veritable power from them. And the best example in the entire world is incomparably the city of Rome, the holy city of Rome. But this requires a new revival, a new awakening. We may indeed return to God, as we never truly departed from Him. As soon as we are alive, this is true. And of course, for a while, we do survive also in death, right? Depending on what we have done in life, and works do work, really. And that connection until the end time always exists. As of course He is the absolute reality. But one does not return to the world in the same manner. This is crucial to understand. We cannot replicate past experiences by merely reintegrating a lost order through an external allegiance devoid of the sacred. Equally, we cannot think simply to do this alone, or that, we are just going to do that each in our own localus, right? Because, it's about our personal merit separated from the world. All our actions have an influence on everybody's action all the time, right? Not by approximation, meaning that this is not just, to some strange materialistic extent. You say, well, if you really live from the other side of the world, it's unlikely that somebody, anyone from there will actually have such a great impact on you in a given moment. We always have in this same instant. Even me here, speaking in front of a microphone before sending you this, I am having an impact on everybody else in the world. Even if I'm close here, if there is nothing material going on. Again, I explained this in the traditional meaning of space. We'll have also to talk about time, because these dimensions propagate the works in the same exact way, and there is always a cumulative enterprise. So we have also to realize our own limits for that matter, so that without the world we cannot make it really ourselves. Thus, when we speak of return, we refer to the traditional spirit, an orientation that reintegrates the foundational principles of every tradition. So in other words, our works are oriented towards the truth, hopefully, which is, if anything, like just one part of the challenge. The other one is giving so much, to the extent there are people that, we've seen this also in Von Clausewitz, like you can know very well how things are, but not really pushing towards that. And so not really accomplishing much, right? There are people who are less, this is against, in fact, old sin, that are less knowledgeable than us, less aware than us, right? Even, committing a mistake, and yet reaching more far than they think. This is, and that we would even do in practice, right? So this is an incredibly difficult concept to even express and to accept more than else, but it repeats itself constantly in history, not because a retribution is, let's say, disproportionate. It's always the same. The problem is that we live in a condition that does not allow us to see why something is better or worse, at least to some extent. That's why also the truth manifests also in the errors of the world, right? And this is why we always have to be extremely careful how we wield our sword, because it's always double-edged, right? And we can give life or taking it away through it. And we're talking about our own, our very own, together with all the rest of the worlds. In the context of the West, of course, we firmly assert that its salvation lies solely in Rome. The West here is not just like the other parts of the world. It's a metaphysical part. It's the Atlantic race. It's more than, it's the hyperboreal race. We will talk about this in videos that we've never done. Many of you, if anything, will be familiar with the terminology, because that's sort of the most famous part of this entire story, but it's actually, I've never really talked about this, I think, up to now, Schwerpunkt, even knowing what it is, because people must understand from how many places you can start from. That's crucial, but it is also in a historical sense what mostly, as people tend to to go back to it in that historicistic sense, but it's in a metaphysical one that you have really to do. So Rome embodies the essence of the West. Within her tradition lies the historical development of the West, enduring as least as it exists within Rome. And I stress this. The salvation of the West lies solely in Rome, for there is no God outside of Rome. The twilight we experience in these terrible times has lingered for centuries, not just as a metaphor, but as a stark reality, because the West resides in a prolonged twilight between the brilliant zenith and the looming night. Just like all tradition, if this twilight has persisted for so long, of course we must look to the rising sun, from which the same West has drawn its rationale and strength twice. The East has a symbol here. We're talking a metaphysical place, not a geographical one, but this is the same meaning. First, we have the foundation of Rome through Aeneas, and later through the new tradition in Christ. These are pivotal points of light upon which the spirit of Rome relies, and all of our history can be understood through a steady reference to these two focal points of creative consistency. They were power-making places converging in Rome, also in a physical sense, of course. History is, of course, shaped not by human hands, but by divine power, a truth often overlooked. Where individuals believe they are most active, they are in fact being acted upon in the strict Latin sense of the term, especially when their drive for autonomy and originality misinterprets sacred and traditional impulses. This really happens all the time. You can actually see in politics. People are excited about specific outcomes and think that now always the better thing is going to come. It's not, right? The fact that a system is collapsing, for example, and somebody tries to run it incompetently and gets busted does not mean that the people who obviously correct their mistakes are actually capable of doing even better than those, right? And if anything, they're mostly like all the reflection of the other, exactly because we're not separated in a physical sense, and we mutually influence each other anyway. So a single person's fault is also at the same time a collective fault, right? True action must reconnect, of course, with the principles that provide measure, value, and efficacy, which are hardly even looked upon like in a strategic sense in, for example, the definition of an objective, right? They're false promises and just, wishful thinking most of the times. The truth, which belongs to an entirely divine order, always remember the doctrine of the two natures, and that our own is the lower one, continuously degenerating, and the higher one, the divine one, is truly perennial in nature. In fact, always prevails, right? Especially when it manifests through its own intrinsic light, often in unexpected contexts, and even through individuals who are at least prepared to grasp it. One might venture to suggest, albeit at the risk of alarming the naive, that words possess an inherent spirit that unveils their deeper meanings, right? There is a sense of primigenial purity that is truly contained, for example, in the word ingenus. We talked about this in the Indo-European root of the Romano-Italic world. You have many profound truths articulated by those who are unaware of their significance as well, which is also that way I used before to say that truth does manifest also in the errors and in the horrors of the world. In fact, significant errors are often disclosed to those who consciously understand their works in a converse fashion. There exists a critical juncture where truth and error occupy an equal footing, right, thereby nullifying each other. Within each resides what the other lacks, right, in the higher order. To clarify this apparent confusion, one must assert that error is merely truth itself, seen in part, meaning their relationship reflects that of a part to the whole, right? It's just like evil is lack of good, right? There isn't another force that, immediately manifests itself as pure evil. Everything is baked into it. Original sin is a metaphysical condition, and it informs this lower nature. Going back to the one means to correct, to straighten up what exists here, not to destroy it, which is a sin in itself. It's a wasted power. It's a wasted life. At times, however, our way to do so does pass, and this, I think, is pretty eloquent from a civilizational point of view, also in the expansion of Rome, and even in the rise of Christianity, that intertwine in that sense true bloodshed and true destruction, but only when this is able to spur a greater force, when it's capable of elevating, like tipping the balance of that metaphysical alchemy, right, our individual and collective elevation. When we examine history, we must acknowledge that nothing accomplished by humanity is outside the absolute will of God. None of it. Everything exists in a deeper sense, even in the lower nature. Yes, it is also true that only those who act in concert with God to fulfill his desires can be deemed truly autonomous, because the one cannot exist, as we just said, without the other, right? There is no accomplishment, there is no value in the work without divine grace, right? Read what Krishna says to Arjuna regarding the ultimate goal of existence in the Mahabharata. This principle helps clarify the foundation of historical sanctions, why some peoples rise, others fall, and why at the same time things do take an overall turn that involves all of these actors. Genuine history involves the continual reference of events to their divine order. That's why Schwerpunkt is the way it is, but that's why I intertwine this religious and traditional history into historical vision, because it is the ultimate meaning of any historical event. History does not study isolated phenomena, right? It's impossible in a strictly moral and scientific sense to start studying something simply saying, well, but I just studied because it's confined within a space. Well, how do you tell the history of the origins, for example? As a military historian, you have to explain why a war is fought and the enmity, the conflict, the will behind the actors, something that goes back. If anything, everybody has an ancestor. Everything comes as a burden. It's not just like the contingency of a moment. And pretending otherwise, in fact, is also the response in civilizing individuals, which is constantly the way they do through history, thinking that it's always somebody else's fault, not to see that it's their own. And it's simultaneously the fault of the carnifex and the victim. Because where do you draw a line, right? If anything, for your own incolumitty, where do you stop caring about yourself and improving to be stronger, to be more powerful, to be ever less defeatable? That's history in a nutshell. This dual condition, if you want to call it in this way, is particularly evident in the history of Rome, of course, when considered within her eternal function, that is truly the perennial source of true power, which remains unblemished and unwavering, even when external circumstances suggest otherwise. Think about this phoenix-like capacity. In a truly Catholic sense, not in a regional one merely. You have the Roman Empire, you have the Holy Roman Empire, you have in this Christendom itself. You have Rome. I explained this in a recent video commentary on the historian's craft. Western dimension that is informed by Rome, even when we see other actors in the age of nations accomplishing world domination. Think about Europeans during the 19th century. You cannot simply say, again, it's Rome. This is not a paradoxed game, which color like the land has, and you decide who is the protagonist. This is a spiritual information. You cannot talk about Gaul and modern France without realizing what Rome did to that. The same goes for Britain, the same goes for Germany, the same goes for any country that bears, still today, from the United States to Russia and beyond, the very symbols of humanity, regardless of, in fact, the shortcomings, of course, from Rome. Is basically the main line there, but also the difference between all these, and reflecting on why that is the case. Like, that is a massive elephant in the room. If you're just concerned about symbols and, say, institutions and representation, be aware that Rome left a mark that no other empire left in the history of the world. It's not like China did or India did, right? There is no trace of that, right? Rome took all over. And this from times largely also that superseded the same, say, what we conventionally think to the Roman Empire. This started from medieval times, and also largely through a Christian age, right? And you understand how complex this topic is, but how many other videos we can in fact make on the same. You can argue that the existence of the West is indebted to Rome. Can you really define any other power that had that foundational capacity of defining the West. Again, you can't quite say Athens, you can't quite say Jerusalem. Like there is so much of those that constitute pillars that are, however, comprehended into Romanity. It can be said at many levels, even banally speaking, the Byzantine Empire was essentially an Hellenic thing. There is no doubt about this. In a ethnic, cultural essence, the same Israel today is an offshoot of the West. You cannot see at these centers and say, well, we're basically talking about like I don't know, like different things that spread on their own and sort of kept going on their own, and they're just that one, and maybe just they cumulate with one another in a separated way. All this was done under the aegis of Rome, right? And there is no other time. There's not like there's been an Hellenic empire that controlled Rome, or a not even the Byzantine one, as a matter of fact, especially in the age of, I mean, essentially in Christianity, of course, because there wasn't any Byzantine before, but I mean, you know what Rome was, what the separation between church and state, that people think it's something from, I don't know, 200 years ago. It is literally foundational in the Gospels, right? And so it's not the same thing. Rome is something else on its own that managed to rule spiritually, also where there was no formal temporal recognition. The same goes for Jerusalem. And it's not like, you know, these cultures did not heavily inform, in turn, also the West. That's not the point that I'm making. The point is that Rome has an overarching capacity that transcends these all, in at least in a hierarchical sense. The existence of the West is indebted to Rome because no enduring holy or sacred achievement can take place there that is not for and within Rome in all our history. Rome's durability, presence, and essential role in the development of the West, alongside her constancy throughout a vast array of events, that is, as we know, triumphs, declines, collapses, and resurrections, more importantly, I would say. Her persistent emergence during the West's most pivotal moments, her universal role, and her formidable vitality, continuously revitalized by the Spirit of God, the Holy Ghost, the Imperium, the Nika, the Victoria, all reveal what Rome genuinely represents. She is, in essence, the East of the West, the rising sun of the West. One could make some specific historical examples here, but one point that I would like to stress is that Rome is vibrantly containing that legacy still today. There are places that you travel to and that are amazing in their own legacy. I would think that every place in the world has something that another, say, doesn't have. When it comes to Rome, it's difficult to make the case in a metaphysical sense, but Romanity, even just from speaking at our lower natural level, is exuding from the city, or from the earthly city of Rome, that is also at the same time, of course, the heavenly city of Rome. It's a place that I do not know in any other, like, this is not about me not knowing, this is obviously a rhetorical expression by saying that there is no such thing like anything minimally comparable by any exponential scale to what Rome is, even just strictly from a cultural legacy, historical, archaeological point of view. It's not a city like the others. Like, I know that many people travel to Rome, visit Rome, do so in the sense of, okay, well, it's a major Western capital, especially loaded, in fact, in historical legacy, and it's an enjoyable place, regardless of issues that really are contingent to just our contemporary world. But let's say where is, like any other part of the world, where at every single step there is not just one, I don't know, big monument that you can say, oh wow, that's definitely impressive. No. We're talking about literally everything, in the soil, in the air, in the light, in the landscape. At every step of the way, there is a church, there is some hidden treasure underground, there is a particular visual, there is an architecture, there is a vestige of the past, there is an ancient, a medieval, a modern, a contemporary work of art. This never ends. The palaces of Rome, people, go to Rome, of course, like they would at least know that there is the St. Peter, the Colosseum, the altar of the fatherland, there is Castel Sant'Angelo, there are all the, of course, in parallel, like the Vatican museums, the Roman National Museum, and more, and beyond, various parks, whatever. But this is just a handful of things that you would at least suggest to a Chinese tourist that has to stay there for 2 days, and that, of course, can't even visit but a fraction of these individual places. What Rome actually is, I think I calculated, it takes 65 years of continuous residence to actually begin to sort of sort out, approximately, churches, museums, palaces, fountains, the ruins, of course, like the various ruins, the various monuments of any kind, like there are the catacombs, there are surrounding Rome as well, outside of the Aurelian walls, mostly within, but also as a broader extension, like as the actual manifestation of such power, also in earthly rule, that is not replicable, right? There is no such thing that conceptually goes. There is not a place in China where it's kind of the same, right? Or that even without the distractions of the communist regime is the same. There is not a place in India that is in the same way. This is not comparable to, say, Constantinople, right? You go there, it's just like an incredibly despoiled place. Like, we don't even technically know what was there or here, right? Rome is a continuous outpour throughout all the eras, and people do not really realize that, because for most of them it stops to the ancient Rome, or the Renaissance, basically. Like, they totally ignored that Rome was, for half of a millennium in the Middle Ages, the most important city in the entire West, at least in terms of size and actual material output. They do not know, 17th, 18th, 19th century history. They do not know the city. They do not leave it. They do not have an actual culture. It's not just about Rome, but all that derived from that also in a broader European sense. I mean, the history of the noble houses of the city, the history of the various, of the Pope, of the papacy. How many people actually know the history of the church for real, right? Not the few notions, all the conspiracy theories or the YouTube videos, which Pope was the most evil, this kind of, thing for the mentally feeble. We're talking about actual education, actual culture, actual history. I mean, even in the elementary basics, hardly any adult that I'm aware of has even a minimal idea of the world or why it existed, right? Make an experiment. Even here, I'm magnifying, of course, expression to match the greatness of Rome, which is, of course, impossible. But in a broader sense, just think about how many people can visit the Vatican and, let's say, not even asking themselves why the Vatican exists. And I mean the Vatican City, I mean today, in the last couple of 100 years or so. I'm talking about, why does a church exist? This is the real paradox. This is the level of absence of tradition, of illiteracy, probably in any cultural aspect. The fact that you just look at material things and you're not able to understand the power manifesting behind that. That's a severe mental issue. This is, again, a severe neurocognitive impairment. It's not normal, right? Just in a heavily degenerated sub-level of humanity, you can't think that this is the normal approach to this, right? I could spend hours explaining this, and this is what I'm planning to do with these videos. I have fun, admittedly, but it's really like a very serious thing. And you must also go on. But the notion being that everything has passed through the influence of Rome, right? Even we look, for example, at the barbarians, right? Let's leave aside how people think history. If we think who the barbarians, quote unquote, were, or how they interacted with Rome. They had the peculiarity of first rendering themselves imperfect through ignorance before kneeling in reverence. Right? They were the first ones to damage the statue of Rome and then kneeling in venerating her. That's how the Ottonians could call themselves Romans in an ethnic, metaphysical sense. Of course, there is a force in modernity that seeks to overlook the historical presence of Rome. This is going on over the last few centuries only, with the rise of the nation state and a gradual departure from the esteemed medieval tradition, of course, passing through the Reformation. So it was all very gradual, but it's sort of embarrassing to see how we know actually history pretty well, at least in a historiographical, academic sense. Like, say, we know what happened 2,000 years ago overall. We know what happened even 3,000 years ago overall. But it's incredible how people somehow skip. I see it even with the topics sometimes that I upload, that people sometimes fixate on antiquity legitimately, but they do seem to refuse maybe like this other crucial part of history. Like, as a medievalist, of course, I'm biased, but the same modern history, like 1500, 1800, let's say, and even just the last couple of hundred of years, they're increasingly crucial in showing how this, let's say, anti-Romanism began, let's say, manifested historically. Of course, there is always some resistance to the sins of who desires to expand, and it's always about a human enterprise that is favored by God, but it is imperfect due to the limits of mortality, of course. But the fundamental notion that, let's say, our civilization has always centered around Rome. It's not like, I don't know, in a random surrounding detached from it, but in a radial position compared to Rome as the holy city, is really not told. Right? We, generally speaking, have the idea of Roman importance, etc. Rome is a well-beloved place for many reasons, but in very secular modern terms, like, nobody thinks of this like what we actually descend in a metaphysical sense, or are contained within the same Rome. This notion has been purposely erased, together with the actual human quality that unavoidably otherwise would recognize the Roman centrality. So in many ways, it's like, I don't know, criticizing Marxism. What does Marxism want? What does communism want? These are forces that always existed. They want to destroy any trace of humanity. They want to annihilate human capacity to summon divine power, and to hating oneself, like dissolving everything into nothing. Of course, if you let's say you bombard people with all sort of anti-countercultural references, let's put it in this way, and you effectively unhinge all the common references of culture, of morality, of value, everything will collapse accordingly. Like, you're going to sink yourself together with the ship that you are destroying, right? So the recognition of Romanity is a fundamental precondition, and even just a necessity in the moment in which you require this power to come back to God. There is no God that's outside of Rome to begin with, and of course the general fascination that people have with Rome is the obviously magnetic force that always attracts you back towards the center as long as you're alive, as long as you have this connection with God, as feeble as it has become. Now, the decline of the West begins, and the West, I intended, if the West declines, the world declines, only exclusively, definitionally, through the deviation from the traditional Roman orientation. Specifically, the Catholic universal perspective that, if you still haven't understood it, it's something predating Christianity. And again, if you don't know that, what's the point of you to even call yourself a Catholic or a Protestant or whatever? The conservative role of Rome in her perennial essence has evolved. Like, why do you think even, I don't know, the Germans decided to call themselves Roman emperors? Right? I have an entire Renovatio Imperium playlist explaining that, but just say, if you don't believe that people are dumb and do things for no reason, that must have sparked your curiosity. It's not an accident. It's not something random. It's not a materialistic, functionalistic exploitation of something that was there, just like an empty vessel. These people believed in the imperial Catholic power through the Holy Roman Apostolic. Now, do you know what apostolic means? Do you know what messenger means? Do you know what the winged glory is? Do you know why we say the Holy Ghost? Do you even know that? Right? It's even simple. Right? It's not a particularly difficult concept. Like, if you're not familiar with grace, if you do not understand what works are in that sense, yes, it's a bit difficult to understand the wall, at least if those are your standards, because otherwise that is not even particularly difficult, if not to accept as an existential condition, like it's something that you can potentially, of course, always access. And so, whether overtly or subtly, when you look at this distance from Rome, you just see a distance from God, and essentially hatred towards yourself. Where do you think that all the hatred against Rome stemmed from? Say, during the Reformation, and it's the same one that people have towards God or religion in general today. Where do you think do you look at society? Where does that come from? Right? And what kind of people are more successful, and in which approach to God? As I was saying before, it's not just like claiming to believe in God or to use that as a sort of paranoid sense of, that there are lots of people who use their religion because they feel culturally inferior as they are, as a sort of, it's just my thing, so it can be everything, so it's a devoid of worth. But who are the people who actually believe in God, and how do they live differently from other people, and what do they do? We're talking the West here, which is the best place you can live in the first place. And if you self-sabotage, it's because, yes, you're the lesser element that failed at the easiest thing in the world, and of course you hate yourself, and of course you hate God, right? And you hate the institution, you hate the church, you hate the entire concept it stands for, even just from a human point of view. Let's not even talk about, of course, the metaphysical standard you're completely unaware of. And so, of course, this process throughout history is manifest in various forms and expressions, depending on the context of different times. The misleading superficiality prevents us from perceiving, feeling, and comprehending the profound power of the spirit of Rome. As what I was saying before regarding visiting the city, if you do not know what you're looking at, of course, you'll just take some picture to post on Instagram, you will go eat some gelato or something, and that's your Roman holiday, right? But you will have effectively gotten nothing as from any other place you would travel if you are of that subcultural temper. So it's a pity, right? You can at least understand this in any case, like when you're younger and dumber and more ignorant, you visit some place and then you visit them, I don't know, 10 years later, and you say, oh my God, this is so beautiful because now I know what this is about, right? And I can understand how at the time I just had no clue whatsoever. This is exactly what humanity is nowadays. It's not like it lacks the capacity of going back. It never did, right? But it's a constant self-hatred, self-pressure into worthlessness, as lesser people. The spirit of Rome is the focal point for all returns to tradition, for all people in the world. This is the interesting aspect. Of course, if you're a Westerner, you're overwhelmingly advantaged, right, and privileged so much, and this is why it's even more despicable for you not properly to know nothing, at least in the measure in which you're not even trying. You're actually self-sabotaging further, right? And there are two dimensions of this. Like, one is the spiritual path, the other is the temporal one, right? And of course, this encompasses the very clash between the contemplative and active realms, the sacred and the secular, orthodoxy and heterodoxy. And of course, you know that you need both, right? You can't really balance the entire system without these two elements at the same time. You cross one off and you end up unbalanced on the other side. You can't have too much zeal and ending up as a heretic because you haven't tested, say, the sort of the concreteness of life. You can act, but end up to forget, let's say, the general meaning of everything in a guidance perspective. You think you make your own path, but you go crush somewhere instead. The unity of the West is embodied in Rome, right? Catholic, of course, stresses the unity of this all, as this unity has been fully realized twice, right? Through the ancient and modern traditions via the three forms of governance: kingship, republic, empire, alternating. This is not just about ancient Rome, as well as through the establishment, the re-establishment of the three social orders during the medieval period, the Indo-European tripartite order, so-called, and that there are so many numerological connections with Rome, by the way, the center of with one side of the world, one side of the other, as the papacy was trying to entertain, look, still medieval times, the idea of a unique Roman Empire, which is something that we have also somehow lost as this notion. We think that we're the Byzantines, and then the Holy Roman Empire, and whatever the word was not Rome, and the papacy was now this weird thing. It was Rome all along. You know, I don't know if you get this. Like, at the time, they believed that, right? They all believed that. Like, it wasn't like, I don't know, a standpoint of this or that power. Of course, you can't see a general deviation already at that point for other nations, if anything, for the fact that the same Christendom was not under a single ruler. Of course, that was a deficit that corresponds to that level of human degeneration over time. But the idea of recompacting everything was still alive in the wake of Rome, exclusively in the wake of Rome, throughout all Christendom. Again, I have thousands of videos, mostly about medieval history. If you're interested in that, you can find also for many. There is a Christian history playlist there, which includes also, in fact, ancient history. If anything, there is also the medieval Christian one. I made also playlists about history of religions at large. There is one about the Holy Roman Empire, one about the Renovatio Imperii, one about the Carolingians, one about the Byzantines. Well, I get pretty big ones, by the way, because I love these topics, and I try to dedicate as much as I can to them, exactly to stress this aspect. But as we were saying before, there are some cardinal points also in the mythology of it all. For example, the traditional transition is marked at the beginning by the arrival of Aeneas and the advent of Christianity later. They both originate where the sun rises. You can connect this as a meeting point of different forces. You know that all the sort of the Atlantic cycle, at least as a relic in basically all the mythologies that we're aware of, talks about a race of gods coming from the West. And we have, now we should digress in things that I do not advise to do not to do at home alone, by the way, by yourself. Woolward Indo-Europeans in this right? And also how like the Indo-European migrations invaded Italy and the West, and so how do we reconnect that to movements of peoples? They're different things, of course. They're not at the same level, so there is an actual explanation, at least in a traditional sense, and we will see this in another video. But we are at the very beginning of this, so I'm sorry to be so hermetic and esoteric, but occult and cryptic, but it's a lot of stuff, and one must at least get the frame right, then starting to add a bit more of pulp. When you look at these events, just like the arrival of Inez or St. Peter, St. Paul, this heralds the beginning, respectively, of 2 cycles, right? Only the first of which is fulfilled, by the way. Very important to stress because of the obvious eschatological implications of Christianity as far as, at least as the figure of Christ is concerned. It would be actually the case for the same first cycle, but indeed the Roman one is more complete than the Christian one. Not in a antithetical or dysfunctional or misaligned way, but it's all meant to be, right? These cycles mirror the sun's movement from east to west, of course traversing through the south, which is represented by Italy, the Saturnia Tellus. Actually, there is something more than that, because Italy corresponds a median temperate area between the very south and the north, and this is exactly where the prophecies talk about where the Redeemer will stem from. We will have to talk about the various cardinal points and also specific geographical areas in the traditional vision. However, what the Saturnia Tellus is, it's the Latium. That is essentially during the Golden Age, Saturn is overthrown by his son Jupiter, and he takes his new abode into Latium. That becomes the age, in fact, of time. There is a connection there with the same Janus. We will have to talk about the data because it's crucial to understand like the cosmic centrality in a strictly astronomical way of Rome on Earth, which is also actually the very cardinal point here that we're missing in a sense. But this convergence, right, of the north and the south, the east and the west, is fundamental. The Saturnia Tellus, of course, has with itself like that terrestrial, like this concept of maternal and protective deities that is symbolized as well. We will see it by Janus Bifrons, who gazes towards both the east and the west, signifying the opening and closing of a cycle. Without this, there wouldn't be Rome technically either. Then you have the Godfather in Jupiter, which has risen also properly to that level of absolute virility. That also, of course, is necessarily worshipped in order to rise to the same absoluteness. Jupiter is God, is Christ, notoriously. Also, Dante is pretty explicit about this, but it was all one with the entire Catholic tradition. In fact, it's just something that people do not understand today, but it was extremely clear in ancient and medieval times. Now, accordingly, Janus is, there are these two terms, both post vorta and ante vorta. That is to say, embodying the past and the future, right? So you have this central, crucial focal point, uttering vetera usu nova, which reestablishes the unity of a traditional axis that generally serves as the world's axis, crossing in Rome, right? And the concealed name of Rome is in fact inscribed between Janus' two faces, we do not know what the secret name of Rome is, notoriously. This was the case. In ancient Rome, Rome has different, say, there is a specific etymology referring to the location, but there was, of course, a sacred name of the city that was to remain such. And in fact, this remains inaccessible without delving into the profound mysteries associated with Janus. That is, in fact, an incredibly primitive, say in a metaphysical sense, deity regarding the foundational principles of the world. It's as if you had to enter the absolute logic and truths of a point, a line, or a surface, right? This is what Janus is in correspondent spatial terms. Now, the Romans intentionally kept the real name of Rome hidden to ensure that their sacred city remained elusive. In fact, when they besieged an enemy city, they would notoriously call upon the protective deities to withdraw, right? Believing that the capture could only occur if these guardian gods first suspended their protective influences and departed. And this is crucial because not just the Romans literally made a speech in front of the besieged city, calling to the her gods and saying, "Look, if you don't just side with us," right? But they would threaten and say, "If you don't, just know that our God to begin with is more powerful, and we will erase you from the face of the earth, and you will be annihilated in eternity." And so the concept of humanity expanding because of the sum of these powers that were essentially taken away from the enemy that also followed. Think about the Auxilia, the Socii, etc. Like this really exemplifies the true power of Rome, which in herself, in her mystery, served as an invisible focal point between East and West, that is to say, situated at the intersection also of the North-South axis, and that is essentially where all these other deities were to cosmically converge and be revolving around. And only those who controlled the center could inspire to take that. They were an elect race, right? That's what Romans believed of themselves naturally. Like all the peoples that here do the deal, right? There are the Jews, there are the Franks. They all knew what their mandate was, but Romanity supersedes that, right? All these peoples, the elect peoples themselves that are called to come to Rome and to strengthen the world force through the one of the Holy City, must necessarily converge to a pre-arranged center by the will of God. Rome thus functions as a static center amidst the cyclical evolution of divine night and day, mediating between life and death, time and eternity. From this hidden wellspring radiates the profound light of the West. This is the real meaning of the West, that can be expressed, of course, through other also religious, moral, and sort of metaphysical concepts, but that as far as the cosmic centrality of Rome in the universe transfiguration is fundamental. Because it's from this point that power perpetually flows aligned with the destinies of the West. To turn away from this source is futile, because you will get destroyed outside. There is no God outside of Rome. Everything inevitably returns to Rome. It is really true that all roads lead to Rome. That's what the Romans actually meant, not just the fact that, of course, like there were and there still are massive roads that connect the city with the surroundings, dating from those times. And should it cease to return, of course, the West would face eternal demise, with no salvation inside but Rome. We're not addressing, of course, trivial human affairs like misguided claims of supremacy. Right? Power is power. The Imperium must be respected, but as we observed, in as much as it must be accomplished in an absolute sense, our idea of political rivalry ceases right in front of what Rome did ever. Like there's never been any other empire who could accomplish what Rome did, because we live in the wake of Rome anyway. This is not, again, a matter of how people conceive this stuff, like, but Rome, like, I don't know, I thought it was a state, so what then state ends. I already explained this. The West is Rome itself. It's at least a part of what was Rome, which is, in no other case, the centrality of the world. As history has, I think, pretty abundantly explained. Now, we could also explain in other metaphysical terms why Rome was even so more central than older and very powerful empires as well that are enormously impressive, to say the least. But there is a function that Rome has to fulfill in this sequence. And this is why these empires do not really have a legacy anymore. At least they had it, they have left it, but it's nothing so alive and so ever regenerating with Rome. It's not like you're rethinking about, I don't know, let's live in the wake of the Achaemenid Empire. Right? Even if you're a Persian, you realize that the Achaemenid legacy is not really out there in the same way Rome's is. This is valid basically for any other empire. And again, you can even banally see it from how many sort of attempted self-identifications with Rome the thing went. You can argue, of course, that by degrading power, like that Romanity is in the way it can be wielded by men, that is wielded today by men, is reduced, no doubt. So yes, of course, like the first cycle, the Roman one, was not repeated. So you can't even say for the Holy Roman or the Byzantine Empire that were the most direct successors, of course, that it was quite the same thing. Yes, it is true, but it shouldn't be done in that sort of secularistic and modernistic sort of depreciating aspect, like saying these were intrinsically, inherently something different that have nothing to do with the original principle, because that is putting the original principle down, not wanting to recognize what the actual legacy of Rome really is still today, even after those empires are over in our earthly conventional sense. So you understand, again, how I'm trying to keep myself balanced today to a metaphysical coordinate. Because really, when discussing Rome, we encounter a reality governed by sacred order, thus not belonging to our world proper. And there's no other way to put it. It belongs to the higher nature. On top of which, Rome is a center towards which all must converge. So it has that's why there is no God outside of Rome, because the only path to God is Rome. There is no other. You can search far and wide. You won't find it. No one can aspire to be that. And this, of course, encompasses as a consequence all the, not just all the two traditions, the Roman and the Christian one, say the Roman meant in a ancient Roman sense, that have embraced the holy city over the centuries, but the world entire, right? The miracle of Roman conquest, both earthly and heavenly, cannot be adequately understood otherwise, nor can we comprehend Rome's enduring universality, for example, throughout the Middle Ages. Like, just people do not understand that normally. Like, the concept that the entire Europe, for example, revolved around Rome, even in those countries that had not been conquered by Rome. And not just because of the Christianization, but because people knew, even before that, that the center of the Catholic Empire lay there, right? It's weird how we sort of downplayed, for example, Rome compared to Constantinople, also during, say, I don't know, everybody knows about the Varangian Guard visiting Miklagard, right? But do we want to focus in a more peripheral sense, including, I'm referring to the Byzantine Empire, and realize what Latin Germanic Europe was doing at the time? Because this is mostly like my another usual complaint of mine, that for some reason we hyperfixate. Of course, I mean, I understand the coolness of the Vikings, but aside from the fact that nobody cares about the Magyars or the Saracens in an equal way, and we kind of understand sort of the petty reasons why, but do we want to concentrate on the fact that the greater force in Europe at that point was the Latin Germanic one? Like, even if you want to consider the Byzantine one, okay, even though it wasn't just Europe, but by sort of ethnic extension, let's even claim it was. Do we want to appreciate the disproportionately ecumenic role that the papacy alone, let's not even talk about the Carolingian or the post-Carolingian kingdoms, also as a sum tied by Rome, given that the only crown for this wall was exclusively connected to Rome, and if somebody had not wanted to do so for some reason, said, no, I will crown by myself, no, you have to go to Rome, and everybody does it. Everybody does it. And there is nobody else that claims any other title of that kind without Rome, right? You may just want to picture this. Leave aside the massive political, military, social output of this Western Christian system. If you don't want to say bloc, which, however, would be relatively fitting considering that they were actually just much more cooperatively resisting, especially to these surrounding forces that were just there harassing. In fact, the center that was remodeling, not really having any chance to subvert anything there. But the sheer cultural influence that Rome had, right? Wherever you come from, ask, I don't know, an average person that you know, do you understand, say, in terms of, it's banal to say, to an extent at least, because also people attach different meanings to that, but say to artistic, literary, historiographical, religious, theological, but even juridical, aesthetic output that Rome had between, say, the 6th and the 12th, the 13th, or beyond. I mean, this is true up to this day, in a sense, but specifically in that age that people decide to label as the Dark Age and thinking that, I don't know, Rome was over. What do you think really happened to Rome? That at some point some barbarians arrived, razed everything to the ground, and then there was just the ruins that you see today. Do you know the actual history of the city of Rome? Do you realize how it was actually like in the 7th or the 8th century? I mean, not those sort of dumb YouTube videos that tell you how it is to walk in the streets of Rome, I don't know, in 600 AD, and then they just tell you what they see, and just a materialistic, idiotic, secular, modern view of the world. Like, do you actually know what was happening? Like, what the popes were doing, what the rulers of the world were doing with Rome at the time? Because I've never seen anything outside of my own videos about that topic. And it's not just like a mystery. Like, if you just pick a book and study, like, you will know that. Like, you can access it from so many different sources, even open ones, even if they're dated at times. Like, say, the most updated historiography if anything, to appreciate the scale of how much we actually know and how central it was to all European and Mediterranean affairs what Rome, the papacy, the Roman nobility, the Roman people were. That's the question you should. This is not a rhetorical question. Like, I'm literally asking you to ask, of course, yourself or any other person that you think could surprise you in the reaction of, like, to actually even like realize whether they have ever pictured the existence of this reality. And then given the answer that in this case would be the one of a rhetorical question, wondering why the answer is that one that we all know. We must be honest. Like, if we are not honest, it's done, right? You don't even try. And in Rome, the seemingly divergent traditions find common ground, deriving their strength from the same divine source, that is the Holy Ghost, Victoria, the Spirit of God, right? Accompanying the transfigured hero, after having been the fury, that the female demon of victory, tamed by the most virile, absolutely powerful ruler, a leader, to heaven, right? In the plenitude of God. This is what the Roman triumph was. Like, when you walk across the Imperial Forum, just if you look at the Via Sacra, do you realize what happened on that road? Do you know why it's do you know what sacrum means in Latin? I don't mean the literal translation in English or whichever language you speak. I mean the actual meaning of sacrum. I should definitely make many more videos about this. There is a few I made about Indo-European etymologies about this stuff, but we shall definitely make a lot more because it seems so deserving. I mean, Schwerpunkt could be largely also about this. Now, the point of this is that I care particularly about is that only in Rome will the West discover its peace and unity. Even as peoples and nations fade away, there is a biological continuity, and as long as that exists, everything is reintegrated into the Roman tradition of balance. What do you think the Roman civitas was? You know, the Roman civitas corresponded to the right of bearing arms, to the cingulum militaris, to nobility/freedom that lives in the wake of the Romano-Germanic tradition and of any other that was encompassed by Rome. I stress very much this Latin-Germanic type, but it's not like, I don't know, the Slavs or other peoples, like, did not actually join in this. Like, more or less Europe is divided in those three elements. Yes, there are, I don't know, the Greeks. There is even much of that at a point. At least you do find, I don't know, lots of Byzantine refugees after 1453 or right around there that, for example, become, I don't know, Roman cardinals, as a matter of fact. Bessarius is very famously one of those. We're talking, of course, the age of humanism, of the letters, the revival also of the Greek classics, etc. But as part of the West, as part of a tradition that succeeded, that was flowering from within herself, right? Let's abandon this myth that basically the West learned everything from others for some strange reason, but nothing was ever born in the West. Really? Really, do you think that that's actually your explanation? I've been, studying again the Middle Ages, which is the era for which normally this is pointed out, but not only. Let's leave aside even just the spiritual balance, which is everything. Why do things tilt in favor of Rome for some reason, magically? Exactly, that's the point. But the notion that, I don't know, that the West, the Romano-Frankish West was some sort of, noob that had to learn stuff from. I studied the Crusades for a long time. There were lots of scholars, for example, that claimed that everything came from the East, science, trebuchet. If you look at if you study even just from a literary point of view, what the Westerners did, that is to say, knowing in advance what was in the East that was not even used at that time, going there, picking it, and using it to inform like a practice through a theory that had already developed on their own on the basis of some sort of cleaner text, while they were also booming in so many other fields, including, I don't know, look what the Bolognese school was doing with Roman law, or look at what theology was being studied like in Paris. I think that we should, at least if that we know today, actually, from the most updated survey, that, of course, the prior model is heavily incorrect, but for some reason, the same reason why you're self-sabotaging is that you have been trained to think that was the case. And you don't know. You see, this is not a fringe theory. This is what people, I don't know, would like to be. That can't. It's literally what we know. It's really what we study on history books, just to make the effort. Other than, of course, writing it ourselves to an important degree. But everything gets back to this Roman Schwerpunkt, center of gravity. And this is not originally why I called my channel like this, but at least subconsciously, of course, there was some of this foundational meaning. I, after all, accessed history of religions mostly through von Clausewitz in a truly spiritual, moral sense. Now, the question is there truly another homeland or of tradition in the entire West assigned that is as sacred as Rome? As we said before, this is a rhetorical question. Only those blinded by narrow... I don't think it's even nationalism per se. It is just like feeling threatened by Catholic standards. If you, of course, root for something that is less than universal, of course you hate everything that is universal. You just basically want to fit a smaller box because that's how smaller you are yourself, and that's how you limit your power, and that's what we've been witnessing happening in the world. So only people like this can fail to recognize the truth encapsulated in the universal name that represents all the light of the West. Romanity should be your nation without being a nationalist, because in this nation, whichever nation you come from, you can be part of. And only if you are of that higher quality that is superior to your nation, whichever it is, at the same time. Right? So it's contributing, it's as if Rome were a filter, right, between a medium, between God and whichever other earthly enterprise, so that you can come, and you should come, from every background, right? Rome was created at a point, in a political sense, for this to be self-evident for anyone, really, that like any other reduction of universal power, and unless you're able to surpass this medium, like how can you? That we do not know. People haven't been able. Again, look at all the empires that have succeeded one another. What happened to them? Were they first of all hegemonic, like Rome? Were they truly Catholic? Were they truly sparking a divine transfiguration in their era? Did they represent the golden age? No, none of them. Right? You can have great empire. You must respect their might, because that always derives from God, but it's not the same. In all of these, in a way or another, we're mimicking Rome, trying to be Rome's heir in a way or another. Now, behind the significant events of history lies a sacred tradition, and this is what I think it's the most beautiful thing of it all. That this is not an exclusive system. Like it is if you are, of course, not worth it, but this is a safe haven for all the noble of heart. This is really what all the greatest rulers have pursued. So it should be a power bringing us together in merit of quality, and so not one towards which you should feel hostility, if not by redirecting this towards your own shortcoming. It should be comforting. It shouldn't be upsetting. All right, it should spark that will, that motivation to be better that we all share. And just know that Rome calls you in that very moment you perceive it. And so this inexhaustible source of true power, of eternal redeeming potential. Always think about this. Think about the Church of Rome. What do you think that is? How do you think it works? Why do we believe in works to begin with? And what is redemption? What effect does this have? What does the power of the truth have? Right? This is the question that we pose. Who can claim to be as great as God? Who can claim to be able to rule the world? Right? When you look at the ecclesiastical tradition, remember this. This is not sabotage, it's the opposite of it. This is how you grow tough leaders. That's how you are able to master the world without complaining for any of your shortcomings. They're always your fault, no matter what others do. Because if you do well, you will always win, together with the others. Right? Only the light of Rome can dispel the darkness of ignorance, for she is the light of God, which seeks nothing less than the entirety of existence. Thus, behind both priests and the warriors, respectively, contemplation and action, representing the spiritual and the temporal, respectively, stands Rome, embodiment of the Spirit of God. To deny Rome is to deny God. It is essential to frame the issue in these terms of truth. Anything that is not Roman is profane, impure, and anti-traditional. For the salvation of the West, we must willfully seek to restore everything to its Roman essence, allowing what Dante called the bird of God, the eagle, to find its own in Rome, once again, on the fatal hills of Rome, enabling the urbs to rekindle her role as the domina gentium in the name of God. Only Rome can avert the impending catastrophe of the West by restoring its tradition in a complete and integral manner through a process that unfolds from within, proceeding from the supreme to the infinite. It's as if Rome was the launch pad for heaven, for the stars, for the firmament of God Himself. This represents a true restauratio in the broadest and most precise sense, restoring the world, restoring the Catholic Empire, merging spiritual authority with temporal power in a heavenly harmony. This dual evolution must bring the West back into the magnificent traditional stream of Rome, facilitated by the combined efforts of two orders, the priesthood who engage in contemplative practices and the warriors who act in the world. Can't be the same, right? Originally, it was the case in God Himself, in the age of kings, the age of Romulus, that with his Caelus first compacted the rising sun of the West. At the heart of this renewal lies the sacred science, such a forgotten thing, which must resume its eternal role by reorienting everything according to the traditional axis. However, because the temple must be protected, remember the Templar tradition and what that revolves around, the warriors will stand in defense of the priests, containing the ever-changing forces of the operari, the fourth estate. Right? There is a divine mandate to defend the citadel of God. This was the principle of Rome. And the control of Jerusalem. This was also in many ways Athens in the form of Constantinople, defending the Catholic unity of the world. Because these lands belong to us by divine mandate. And you cannot deny the call. Our activity will be guided and moderated by the authority of the priesthood and the power of the warriors to prevent any dilution of tradition. You should seek both. You cannot successfully act without contemplation. You cannot successfully contemplate without action. The third caste cannot be properly instructed unless the first to continuously exemplify a life of contemplation and action, unwavering devotion to God, and absolute dedication to the leader. He said the operaria meant the third estate rather than the fourth, but there is a very thin thread there, because the fourth estates are, estaters are properly the slaves, the serfs. So in the Indo-European tripartite order, you have only the people of God. So you have some blessed that are part of the people that work for the leaders and sustain the priests as well, and these are the third estate, right? They are the true freemen still, right? And they can enjoy also in the other crafts. Think about ora et labora, or the monastic military orders. This is the true spirit of the Middle Ages, the soul of chivalry that we will look at also in the Ghibelline imperial tradition. In any case, these principles form the foundation of a triumphant Romanitas. Only upon this foundation can the spirit of Rome rise up, breaking through the thick fog of ignorance that has long obscured the West, the sinister dimming of the sacred in the heart of men, to realize instead that the noble peace that safeguards the truth of God with a temple defended by the swords of its protectors. It's the citadel of Saturn and the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill. It's the sacred geese of the Capitol that are truly connected to this celestial beings that cross this space, the Rome of the center of which is Rome, right? The Knights of the Swan, the Romans on their Liburni that are going to pray the rich and sensual south and to order it at their own image, to transfigure it in divine power. These are the ones that help screeching, like fencing off the dark forces at the gates. Without Rome, there is really no God, right? And in this light, we should think of Rutilius Namucianus' words, that is to say, let's say it in English, that of what before was the world, now you made a city. And remember that wherever you are and whatever your path is, you are within the shadow of Rome. You cannot abandon, and this is just projected by yourself. It's just you're turning back to the light that is projecting it on a direction that is not the one that you deserve. Rome never dies, right? And there is no world without Rome. There is no God without Rome. It's difficult to end a video of this kind just through such ideas, not creating something more powerful and authoritative, but the essentials, the fundamentals of these principles, I think they were satisfactorily delivered. This is again just the beginning of a video on similar topics that I intend to cover for reinforcing the awareness of Roman tradition that is too often seen as a matter of personal choice or taste, as if what human beings liked was a criterion of absolute metaphysical power. But we're habituated to the mental deficiency of the average person to know that that's in fact not what we're interested in ourselves. What is crucial here is, of course, to remember that this is really true, that if you escape this world, if you escape this tradition, you cannot stand on any other ground, right? This is never going to come back in any other form but the Roman one, and it is up to you if this can be revived or not. And for all the people who are skeptical, well, just know that this is unfruitful, right? For you, if anything. Like this may be, again, everybody else's fault. This is exactly how we have intended this concept, but it's not in the sense that going to make it, in fact, more, say easier, say more accessible for yourself in this way. So I understand that people's horizons are limited, that there is a general sense of, embarrassment for the current historical moral conditions and more, but this is not really what is important. Important is how you can fix it all, and this is what we're making these videos for. All right, for today, however, I stop it here. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. As always, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.